On this first Sunday of August, it feels strange to say that summer is nearing its end. I talked to my daughter yesterday in South Carolina, and my grandkids are starting school tomorrow. I couldn't believe that. Congregations are going to start planning for the next church year shortly, and that being the case, I thought it might be a good idea to consider the role of congregational life. How does congregational life relate to events beyond our walls? How do those events shape our role in our community? How will it shape our responsibilities as a people of faith in this next year to come? I heard it said once that any religious group that aspires to integrity has to emphasize three key concepts: behaving, belonging, and believing. Now, at any given time and in different circumstances, a religious movement may decide that it needs to concentrate on one of those aspects more than others. But if you emphasize one over the other two all the time, you're likely going to end up in the dustbin of history. It does matter how we behave, which is why we write covenants and policies about how to be together. And it does matter what we believe, which is why we modify our principles on a regular basis. But this morning, I want to argue that with the current state of the world, we are being called to maintain a strong sense of belonging to one another, to our larger Unitarian Universalist tradition, all that huge cloud of witnesses who throughout our history have testified to the enduring ideals and the vision of liberal religion. We belong to each other. I remember the first time I walked into a UU fellowship. I think I've probably told you this story again, but maybe it bears repeating at the beginning of every church year. It was about 30 years ago now. A friend of mine had invited me to join her for an evening class at the Eno River Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Durham. She was taking the class with the Reverend Jenny Knoop. And at the time, their fellowship consisted of the fellowship hall, which is where we had worship, and an old 1960s style ranch house with a sunken living room, which is where they had their library and the classrooms, and then the offices were the bedrooms. That was the Eno River Fellowship at that time. And that night we began with a check-in and a chalice lighting, both brand new experiences for me. And I remember when it was my turn to check in, I asked to pass because I was in the company of strangers and I was a mess that night. There was no other way to describe it. Just a few months before that evening, I had a pretty nicely wrapped up life. I had a career that I loved. I had a solid marriage. I had 2 teenagers that seemed to be doing well. I had a supportive extended family, a neighborhood that I enjoyed, a church family that felt really supportive. I was comfortably middle class, conservative, white Christian woman, professional, someone who dressed in Talbot's clothes 5 days a week. And then over a period of just a few months, I would lose my sister, who was my best friend, in a car accident. The department I worked for at Duke closed, and I was out of a job. My husband left me, and my children were not doing so great. Along the way, when my husband left me, he made sure that he alienated my extended family, my church family, my neighbors. And when I went to my pastor at the time to tell him about some of these things, he told me that if my faith had been stronger, these things would not have happened to me. So this was the mess I brought to ERUF that night. And yet no one seemed to care that I was in this mess. No one asked me where I was from, where I had been before. No one suggested I join a committee to fit in. I have to tell you, if someone had, I would not have crossed their threshold again. No one expected anything from me that evening. I didn't need to pretend that I was braver or smarter or more together than I was that night. I could just be my quiet, confused, angry, hurting self. And what a blessing that night was. In any faith community, it is important that we hold behaving, believing, and belonging in a kind of creative tension. But the sort of grace I experienced that evening, I think, is where our superpower lies as a denomination, that broad sense of welcome. Since becoming a Unitarian Universalist, I've often been struck by how a sense of belonging can transcend so many of our differences, even time and space. How many of you have met another UU from another city or another part of the country? Whether they're humanist or Christian or some other spiritual discipline, you can immediately recognize a kindred spirit. Oh, I get you, right? I get you. You belong to me, I belong to you. In a way that can remind us that even in the company of strangers, we are all brothers and sisters in the things that matter most. Religious communities that find their distinctiveness through the recognition that we all belong together, I think, are the communities that can bring real healing to the world right now in its brokenness and its divisiveness. As the summer has progressed, I've been hard-pressed to remember a time that has been so broken and divided. This past week, I had the opportunity to read an interview between Margaret Wheatley, who's one of my favorite writers, and Tammy Simon. It was posted on a blog called Sounds True. Now, Wheatley is a writer and a management consultant who draws from chaos theory and systems analysis to do her work. And the interview that I read concentrated on the cycles of life and the cycles of history, especially as they apply to the chaos of the world we now find ourselves in. The interview is very difficult reading. It's difficult because she insists that we look at the present moment in a very clear and unbiased way. She says that when we do, what we see is that there's not just chaos, but rather systematic and intentional forces destroying our future, destroying people, destroying our motivation. When Wheatley trains leaders, which she defines as anyone willing to help, I love that definition of leadership. She tells them that we have now passed the tipping point where the systems that we have grown accustomed to can be repaired. This is why it's so difficult to read her work. And so she says that we have to give up being activists on a grand scale. Also, she suggests we have to give up the distinctly Western notion of continuing progress, of always being able to make things better, of always being able to fix things. Life is a cycle, she says. Everything has a life cycle. Organizations go through life cycles. They bloom, they're vibrant, they innovate, and then they gradually ossify into bureaucracies that don't work so well. Civilizations, she says, have the same cycle. Nations have a cycle. The life cycle of a civilization throughout history has tended to be around 250 years. This time period is not random. It includes 10 generations of about 25 years each generation expecting more from the system, but willing to give less, until the system collapses from infighting and less interest in the common good. And when this occurs, she says, we need to change the ways in which we go about being the change that we seek. Instead of trying to save a system that is crumbling, she says, we should instead put our energy toward creating what she calls islands of sanity, where people commit themselves to transcend the current politics, the current culture of greed and self-interest, places where the human spirit can flourish, where people can remember the great pleasure of working together and thinking together and solving problems together. Doing this, Wheatley says, would be a revolutionary act, rising above what we cannot change to create an island of sanity based on values and practices that we hold dear. People who can be leaders of these kinds of islands of sanity have an unshakable faith that people can be creative and generous and kind, but they also recognize that people can be self-interested, narcissistic, brutal, and even savage with each other. And so it takes work, it takes ground rules of behavior and belief, and it takes some courage to say, I'm doing this with my eyes wide open to all the propensities of human nature, but I will not go along with the mainstream. I'm going to help create this island. I'm going to create a sense of specialness for this place, a sense of boundaryness, not to keep ourselves protected from the mainstream, but to keep ourselves creatively alive so that we can do work out in the world. This interview, I just gave you the thumbnail print of with Margaret Wheatley, was conducted 8 years ago in 2018. And I don't know if she's right about our being past the tipping point. I don't know if we need to change our activism in the ways that she suggests. I suspect that right now it would be wise to take a bifocal approach to say, for instance, we are going to strengthen voter rights, and we are also going to create this island of sanity for ourselves. I do know that things have rapidly deteriorated in the past 8 years, and that our 250 years is now upon us. What are we going to do with that? Wheatley says, I cannot change the way the world is, but by opening to the way the world is. And I believe that opening to the world as it is means, first of all, paying attention, reading and listening to good, accurate reporting about the complexities that the world is offering us right now. I also believe, and this is going to be controversial, y'all, but I also believe that we need, as congregations, to get comfortable using some very scary terms, like fascism. You remember a few years ago, we were asked to get used to using the term white supremacy, and many of us did, and we watched for it. And we looked at the ways in which it affected the ways that we moved in the world. And now I believe that we should familiarize ourselves with the strategies of fascism and watch for their strategies, just as we taught ourselves how white supremacy works. I'm going to suggest a book, a very slender little book by Jason Stanley called How Fascism Works: The Politics of Us and Them. The strategy is very simple, really. You devise various ways to divide your citizenry into the deserving and the undeserving. And God help you if you end up in the undeserving category. The deserving and the undeserving could be based on skin color, gender, political leanings, religious leanings. Did you know that recently the Pentagon decided that Unitarian Universalism was no longer a religion? Yeah, this is part of their strategy. If you watch and listen to the news through this lens, you will hear this and see this in almost everything our administration says and does. Ask yourself, when you hear about a new policy, or you hear in one of the confirmation hearings somebody in the administration giving an answer, ask yourself, who are the deserving and who are the undeserving in this story, in this decision, in this statement or in this policy. I would prefer to think that these folks are just rambling. But in fact, they're giving us well thought out rhetoric designed to distract us, but even more to divide us. To divide us. And all of this brings us back to what is the role of congregational life. Each Sunday, you heard Val this morning give a welcome. And she said, all humans are welcome, right? All humans. The Eno River Fellowship, where I'm a member, uses the same welcome every Sunday, and I know you change yours a little bit. But what they say every Sunday is, whoever you are, wherever you come from, whatever your race, gender identities, or whomever you love, wherever you are on your spiritual journey or on your search for truth and meaning, you are welcome here in beloved community. Every one of our congregations has a welcome of some sort that welcomes without exclusion, that has a broad sense of belonging. And we do not say these things just to be nice. We say these things because we mean it. We say these things because we are profoundly pro-democracy, anti-fascist, liberal religionists. We say it because we know what they're up to, and we refuse to play that sheep and goats game with them. Now, some, especially other religious traditions, might say this is a naive way of thinking, and that no community can stand this kind of broad belonging. But I say this is actually our superpower. It's our superpower. It is at the very heart of our theological integrity. Welcoming you is a recognition that the world does not need to be small. It can instead be full of surprise and wonder when we are in the company of strangers. It's a recognition that the people we do not yet know are one of the richest and most important resources we have in teaching us empathy and in building civility. So, when you first walk across our threshold, you will find yourself in the company of strangers. And we welcome you, even if you bring as big of a mess as I did 30 years ago. Because together, we are the prayer. We are the prayer, each and all. May it be so, and blessed be.